welcoming Gabrielle.
So good morning. Can y'all hear me okay? Great. Well, Elizabeth, thank you for that introduction. And I'm so grateful for today's invitation about being with you all here today. Do you all know what today is? Today is International Transgender Day of Visibility. Okay? So how appropriate is today's conversation, right? So not only is it a day for trans people to be visible and be out and to show up in the world authentically, but it's also important for organizations like yours today to be visible in support of trans equality. So thank you all for being intentional in having today's conversation. So as you can see, we're going to be talking about welcoming our trans and non-binary neighbors and congregants. Today, I'd like to create a conversation, some dialogue with you all where there's going to be some Q&A. There's going to be a time of discussion. We're going to have a little bit of reflection over what you've learned last week with my good friend and colleague, Ren Massey. You'll hear a little bit of my personal story, and then at the end, we'll talk about some respectful interactions that you can use individually and as a community on how to communicate with trans and non-binary individuals. So are we ready? Yes. All right. I love a lively crowd here. Y'all got to get with me here, okay? So to give you a little context of how I got to where I am with as co-founder and managing partner of Transformation Journeys Worldwide, as well as my spiritual journey, I'd like to share with you just a brief snippet of my personal story. You know, growing up in a culture that believes that gender is determined by external anatomy makes it difficult for trans individuals like myself to accept and understand what's going on inside of us. That's why many of us have not come out until later in life, although most of us have known since early childhood that there was something different about us. Take me, for example. At the age of 8, I had a born-again experience, which was the beginning of a rich, lifelong relationship with God. At the age of 9, I began having this unusual desire to dress in women's clothes. For some reason, well, what I did is, when no one was home, I secretly slipped into my mom's closet and tried her on her clothes. Notice I said slip, no pun intended. I also didn't understand why I didn't want to just play Barbies. I wanted to be Barbie, and now I am. Now, because I grew up in a very conservative environment, my daddy is a Pentecostal preacher. In fact, I'm a 5th generation Pentecostal preacher. And because this was long before the days of the internet, just how long I'm not going to tell you this morning, I lived the next 35 years of my life in a place of constant unrest, burdened by fear and confusion. In public, I learned to master my feminine desires by being a good student, a good Christian, a talented athlete, a popular guy. After graduating from Emory University and then pursuing a civil engineering degree from Georgia Tech, I then married a beautiful woman, and we had 3 amazing and talented children. I had okay, this is not working. That's me, if y'all want to know who I used to be. Okay, this is not really working here. Okay, here we go. I also owned multiple businesses in the construction industry, and I had a very nice 6-figure income. To top it all off, I was a leader in a large, prestigious Atlanta church, where I led a men's Bible study, I served as an elder, and I was a soloist in our world-class choir. To top it all off, so by all outward appearances, I had it all. But in reality, I was living a life of turmoil because of this internal gender dilemma, which I still had no words to describe. But when I was 45 years old, I accidentally stumbled across a website showing pictures of trans women. This was the first time that this church-going, Bible-believing, son of a Pentecostal preacher had seen anything like this. Yet something within me immediately connected with these images, and I thought, that's me. So I spent the next 5 years doing online research, living between the exhilaration of knowing that's me and the despair of thinking, I can never live my life as a woman. What would God think? What would my family think? But after 5 years of living in this intense turmoil, I finally decided to get help. It was then in my online research, I found a woman right here in Atlanta by the name of Ramona who made a living dressing biological males as women. Now this just goes to show you that you can find anything on the internet if you're looking for it. Well, I finally mustered up the courage to make an appointment with her, and on the day of the appointment, as I'm driving to her home, I was just a hot mess. But as soon as Ramona greeted me at the door and ushered me upstairs to her dressing salon, I thought I had died to go into heaven. I was a little girl in a candy store. You see, her salon was rooms of dresses and shoes and wigs and jewelry and drawers of lingerie. And that's where we started. Not to get too graphic, the first thing Ramona did was she held up a pair of padded panties and said, Gabrielle, here's your butt. I said, my butt? I've got a butt. She says, girl, we're gonna create this feminine silhouette on you. I said, give me that butt. After she got me all padded and dressed, she sat me down in the salon chair and started applying the makeup and a wig, things that I had never done for myself before. Now, all this time that she was doing my makeup and my hair, she was standing between me and the mirror, so I wasn't able to see the transformation that was taking place. When she was done, she looked at me, she says, Gabrielle, are you ready? With my heart beating wildly, I said, I think so. It was at that moment Ramona stepped away from the mirror, and there, for the very first time, I saw myself on the outside as the person I knew I was on the inside. I was 49 years old and meeting myself for the very first time. As you can imagine, this was a very emotional experience for me. And I began to cry, and Ramona quickly caught me and says, no, Gabrielle, Girl 101. That was me first day. Girl 101. If you're crying before I put the makeup on you, not afterwards. Well, several months later, I knew I needed to pursue this fully to see where this would take me. Okay, hold on a minute. It was then, back in 2012, this was back in 2012 when our two oldest children were in college and our youngest was in high school. And because my work had taken me out of town for long periods of time, my wife told the kids that I was out of town working, and I began to live my life as Gabrielle. Now, because I was still employed and still supporting the family, I continued working in my male persona. But in the evenings and on the weekends, I would dress and live as Gabrielle. As weeks went by, dressing in my male persona became increasingly burdensome, while expressing myself as Gabrielle brought me greater and greater joy. But after 2 years of living back and forth between my male persona and my true female identity, a friend of mine introduced me to a trans-welcoming church. Well, despite what people would fear, but more importantly, what God would fear, I mustered up the courage to attend an Easter morning service there. And I'm glad to say that decision changed my life. You see, although I didn't hear anything new that morning, I felt something new. I finally felt the born-again joy of connecting with my Creator as my true self, internally and externally aligned. But it wasn't just this experience, or this connection that was meaningful for me that morning. It was also the warm welcome that I received. You see, being in church as Gabrielle for the very first time, having taken off from my spiritual community for a year, I was trying to make a beeline for the back door at the end of the service. Well, the pastor caught me there and said how nice it was to see me. And he actually encouraged me to come back. Now, I have to confess, I had to pinch myself at this point just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Over the next 2 years, I was invited to bring my gifts of ministry to this church. I joined the choir, which I ended up directing. I started a transgender support group, and I was elected to serve on the executive board. It was during this time that I was at this church that I made the decision to embrace my truth fully and to live full-time as a trans woman I knew I was. But this meant finding some way to earn an income as a trans woman, and this scared me. You see, although this was only 7 short years ago, it was before Bruce Jenner transitioned to Caitlyn Jenner. It was before there were trans characters showing up in our TV programs. It was before there were trans issues showing up daily in our media. Back in 2012, most Americans knew nothing about the trans experience. So the thought of finding work as a 6'3", flat-footed trans woman was really, really scary. But the pastor at this trans welcoming church that I started attending, he counseled me and encouraged me to keep moving forward, doing what I knew how to do. Well, because I knew how to start a business, that's what I did. I started a cleaning company. I started a home renovation company. I started a landscape and lawn care company. And God was faithful and answered my prayers each and every month that I would have enough to make rent. Now, it was during this time that I was embracing my true authenticity 24/7 that I came out to my very conservative family. And as you can imagine, this did not go very well. I was accused of being selfish, being deceived by Satan, sinning against my Creator, being deceived by God. Consequently, I spent many restless nights wrestling with who I was taught God is. And just like Jacob wrestling with the angel, I was committed to hold on and not let go until I had some answers. Well, it was during this time at this church that Linda, who is now my business partner, she shows up in my life a number of times, as you will see. She and I were having a conversation, and during a conversation with her, I received my answer. She reminded me of Jeremiah 1:5. She says, Gabrielle, remember that God knew you in your mother's womb before you were born. And before you were born, you were set apart. You, Gabrielle, are created in God's very image, and you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Well, when I heard these old familiar verses, scriptures that I had known since an early child, a new awareness dawned in me. I realized that God does not live in the boxes of my youth, that God is much bigger than my gender identity, that God can handle this, that God does love me, and that God does accept me. And I, Gabrielle, am pleasing to Him. Well, as I was making peace with God around all this, my family were taking their own journeys with this. And what a journey it has been for all of us. The very first family member that I came out to was my youngest daughter, Samantha. And fortunately for me, from the beginning, she has been supportive and accepting of my true gender identity. My ex-wife, oldest daughter, and son have had greater challenges with their journeys around this, but over time are starting to make peace with it in their own ways. My parents and sister have chosen not to have any contact with me since coming out in 2010. Yet I continue to hold space for them in hopes that their hearts will soften and that they would want to reconnect with me again. So today I live my life out loud, fiercely, as an acknowledgement and celebration of God's love for me. That which I once perceived to be my curse, I now embrace as my truth. And creating a world that works for everyone is now my purpose for living. Thank you. Thank you for listening and embracing and giving me an opportunity to be vulnerable and transparent with you this morning. So what I want to do now is take just a few minutes and reflect back over some things that you all perhaps learned last week with my good friend and colleague, Ren Massey. Anybody familiar with a genderbread person? Okay. Well, the beautiful thing about the genderbread person is it shows the 4 aspects of gender that we all have as human beings. And depending on where we fall on each one of these continuums is how the diversity in our world is created. So, do I need to run through this? Because I was kind of hoping that y'all did this last week. You didn't? Okay. 4 aspects of gender. Gender identity. Gender identity is defined by that which we know. All of us know on the inside who we are, right? Whether it's male, female, a combination of both, or perhaps neither. So there are transgender individuals like myself. FYI, trans is Latin for across. So like the transatlantic flight. So my gender identity is across from the gender that I was assigned at birth. Many of you here may be cisgender. Anybody heard that term? Okay, cisgender. Cis is Latin for the same side as. So for those who are cisgender, your gender identity, who you know yourself to be, is on the same side as the gender that you were assigned at birth, okay? Those are important terms that you need to know in order to feel comfortable and competent when talking with trans folks, all right? So that's gender identity. Gender expression is how we express who we know ourselves to be, right? Through the mannerisms, the clothes we wear, vocal inflection, our hairstyles, the colors we wear, the accessories we wear, right? Okay, biological sex, we know what that is, right? That's the external anatomy that we are assigned at birth. Sexual orientation is who we're attracted to romantically, physically, and emotionally. And this is indicated by the genderbread person's heart, right? When understanding sexual orientation for trans folks, our sexual orientation is always defined from the perspective of our gender identity, who we know ourselves to be. So trans people can be gay, can be straight, can be bi, just like cisgender individuals can, okay? Everybody good with that? That was a quick 101, okay, on the 4 aspects of gender. Now, the one term that you really need to know is the term gender identity. And so when we look at gender identity, we want to understand how different gender identities show up in the transgender community. Here we have the overarching trans umbrella, and underneath that trans umbrella, we have 2 sub-umbrellas. We have a binary umbrella and a non-binary umbrella. The binary umbrella are individuals, trans individuals like myself, who transition male to female or female to male, that identify with a binary culture. A culture that believes that there's only 2 genders, male and female. It's not that we believe that, it's just that we identify with binary culture. But the other umbrella, the non-binary umbrella, are those individuals whose gender identities are neither male nor female or a combination of both. Now, I know that may be a little strange. You're saying, how can that be? Well, we're going to hear from some of these folks, and I'd like to introduce you to some of them by sharing with you a brief excerpt of a CBS News documentary that aired in 2017. So let's listen in. I'm going to stop that for a minute, see if we can get some sound. Everybody doing okay? Any questions while we're doing that? You can't, I know, they're trying to get the sound. Okay. I can't either. And I'm on the front row with you. So let's see. Yeah. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Quick question, since we're stopped. I used to have a couple of friends who are transgender. I say used to have because our circles have just kind of gone off in different directions. And I know that employment was a huge problem for them. And I was wondering if in your businesses you specifically try to reach out to other transgendered people who may not have that experience with opening their own business and have a really hard time getting employed.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I could not hear a lot of that. So can you just say it right here?
Okay, sure.
Much better, thank you.
I will project.
Yes, thank you.
Has difficulty hearing.
So you have trans friends.
About 10 years ago, I had friends who were transgender. They were having a really, really hard time getting employment.
Yes,
And I
yes.
was wondering if in your business you go out of your way to try to help other transgender people who might be having the same kinds of issues that you were afraid that you were going to have.
Absolutely. I was very intentional in my cleaning businesses, my renovation company, and my lawn care landscape company to employ trans individuals because employment is a very significant challenge for the trans community. The unemployment rate for trans community is 3 times that of the normal population. So it's 15% versus 5% for the normal population. So yes. In addition to that, as you heard in my introduction, I'm on the LGBT Chamber of Commerce board, and we are in the process of rolling out a trans work program that promotes a full solution for trans employment here in the Atlanta area. So that's going to be a long-term program, but we're on the front end of that, trying to get that started now. So, great question. All right, want to see if this works now? Or?
Let's try it again.
Okay. Hold up. Got to go back. Try this again.
There's a certain palatable transgender person who has been put forth in the media. Transgender doesn't look just like one thing.
There is more than just boys, girls, men, women. There could be people who live in the spaces between that.
In the 70s and the 80s, we didn't have language for that. We just kind of got lost.
I identify as agender.
I identify as gender fluid.
I identify as genderqueer. The older I get, the more I just identify with being non-binary.
I feel like I've been running from gender all my life, and like this is as far away as I can get.
People think that the word transgender just means, switching genders or transforming. It's much more than that.
There are men and there are women. I am neither of those things.
So I don't know if you could hear in that, but I'm going to go back to this screen. So some of these individuals identify as gender fluid, gender queer, gender nonconforming, non-binary. Again, these are non-binary gender identities for individuals who identify somewhere outside of the typical male and female identity. All right? We're going to hear a little bit more from them here in just a minute. But when it comes to this,
There's a certain palatable.
when it comes to this non-binary demographic, many are calling this the next wave of trans, as revealed in a 2017 Harris poll that shows that 10% of millennials identify as non-binary. Did y'all know that? Okay, this was in 2016. We're in 2019. So I can almost guarantee you that that percentage is higher than that now. 2% of millennials identify as trans. Now, it's important to understand that a trans individual's journey is not black and white. It's not, I step into this box and that's where I stay the whole time. Some trans individuals evolve with their gender identity and their gender expression. And to give you an opportunity to hear what this can look like for a non-binary individual, I'd like to share with you another brief excerpt of this video.
Yeah, so in high school I actually came out as a trans girl. And then was sort of like, oh no, that's not quite right. And so I spent a while identifying as a gay man. And it was sort of one of those things where it's like, this doesn't seem like it's totally right, but it's the closest term that I seem to have for now. When I look back at like high school and college, I'm like, no, I was non-binary then, I just didn't have the language to articulate that.
It wasn't until college, like my first year of college, that I kind of was opened up to this type of thing. I had never heard of being non-binary. I knew about like transgender people and things like that, but I didn't know that there was anything else other than, male, female, and, people that wanted to change.
I first heard about the word non-binary, I want to say about like 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. I knew what the word transgender was. I looked up to trans people because I would, when I was like 13 years old, I'd go on YouTube and see videos of beautiful, beautiful trans people sharing their stories. And then when I started getting more involved in the LGBT community, I just learned about all these terms that, show how people identify. And so when I heard about non-binary, I was like, yep, this is how I feel. This is how I feel.
It's still an evolving process, I feel like, for me, because for a long time, my default clothes was like t-shirt and jeans, with like a sweater when it was cold. But as I've been getting more dresses and skirts and things, I've been starting to feel that, no, I wanted that because it was like the most gender neutral thing I could get away with. But the gender I want to perform like has more dresses and skirts and makeup in it. So I've been moving away from t-shirts and into like things like this. But I'm still very much like exploring that process, and I don't know where it's going to end. And really my position is I don't need you to understand all the gender theory. Like, if you do, that's great, like wonderful. But really what I need you to do is like use these pronouns and don't use these words. And if you can do that, great, we're fine.
So that individual, their name is Ren, okay? So you can kind of see how Ren's journey of coming to terms with who they are, and pay attention to the pronouns that I'm using, okay? Who they are has been a journey. It's been an evolution, okay, as evidenced in that video. But the one thing that Ren said there at the end, just if you didn't hear it, they said this, that it doesn't matter that you know all the gender theory. What you need to know is what pronouns to use and what words not to use. So this is a great segue into our next section of the presentation, and that is respectful interactions. Because we find in the work that we do that people want to do the right thing. They just need to be equipped with the tools to feel comfortable and competent in interacting with trans and non-binary individuals, right? Is that how we all here are today? Wonderful. So, to kick this conversation off, I got to show one more video. I don't know, really? Okay. So, let's skip the video, all right? So to kick this conversation off around respectful interactions, let's start by, in the video, this individual's name is Alexander, and he identifies as a trans man. So trans man, again, is an individual assigned female at birth that transitions to male, all right? His name is Alexander. He uses he, him, and his pronouns, okay? Alexander in the video said that he appreciated when people push back on offensive jokes and comments. And so, how do you do this in a respectful way, in a non-confrontational way? Well, we share a very simple technique with our audiences, and it goes something like this. If you're in the midst of a group of individuals and someone makes a derogatory comment or joke about a trans person, you say, it's interesting that you bring that up because just recently I was attending a training or I was doing some research online, and I learned, and share one thing that you learned with them about trans people. Again, this is a great way to shift the energy of the conversation and create an educational moment, okay? Can y'all do that? Great, all right. If we had heard the video, you would have also heard Jay, who identifies as a non-binary individual, Depending on Jay's gender expression, so, Jay may have a more feminine gender expression one day, a more masculine gender expression the next. Well, depending on their gender expression, they have to decide which bathroom to use that they feel the most comfortable and safe in. And when we're talking about respectful restroom etiquette, those are the two questions that come up. Sorry, this clicker's just working with me here. Am I going to feel safe? And am I going to feel comfortable? And this is not just for the trans people. This is for everyone else using the restroom with the trans people. So when we look at safety, it's important to know that there are no known incidences of trans people attacking cisgender people in the restroom. However, there are documented incidences of cisgender people attacking trans people in the restroom. The bottom line is, we're going to the bathroom for the same thing you're going to the bathroom for, okay? Now, I understand comfortable, because anytime you do something for the first time, it's going to feel a little comfortable. You may do a second take. It's like, ooh, wasn't expecting that this morning, right? Well, the more you do this, the more you embrace trans and non-binary individuals into your community, and you use this to create an educational moment, educating your community that being transgender is not about anatomy, it's about gender identity. Over time, people get comfortable with this. And if they don't, then there are other facilities that they can use to feel comfortable, okay? We're going to talk next week more about what you can do as a spiritual community as it relates to things like this to create a welcoming environment. Today it's more about what you can do individually, okay? We also get asked this question, Gabrielle, how do we navigate the conversation around pronouns? I mean, think about it. If we're talking with someone that has a gender expression of someone on the screen, how do we know what pronouns they use, and how do we ask them without feeling awkward and being offensive and disrespectful with them, right? So we share a very simple technique with our audiences, and it goes something like this. You simply introduce yourself. My name is Gabrielle. And my pronouns are she, her, and hers. How about you? I'm she. Great. Good response. So what that does is that sends a message to the person that you're talking with that, one, you understand the importance of pronouns, and two, that you want to connect with them in a respectful way, and you're not placing the burden on them to educate you on the importance of pronouns. Now, if my business partner were here this morning, she would tell you, the first time I did this, it was very uncomfortable and very awkward. But it's a good thing that she used this technique when she introduced herself, because guess what? She guessed wrong, all right? So the first time we do anything, it's a little uncomfortable. I'm going to help you get over that this morning, all right? So I want you to turn to someone next to you, and I want you to introduce yourself with your pronouns and say, how about you? So do that right quick, okay?
My pronouns are he, him, and his.
You say, how about you? Hi, Keith, thank you. My name is Gabrielle, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Thank you. So there you go. You did good. Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's come back. Just checking the time. How much? Oh my God, okay. What we don't get to this week, we'll get to next week, okay? Now, what I'm not suggesting is you use that technique every time you introduce yourself, okay? But what I am inviting you to consider is paying attention to the audible and visual cues that you see when you're talking with someone. And if you're in doubt, don't make assumptions. Always ask. This is a respectful way to do that, okay? Cool? Now, when you ask someone their pronouns, you may, in addition to hearing the typical he, him, his, she, her, hers, you may also hear they, them, theirs. This is what many non-binary individuals are using as their singular personal pronouns. And for you grammarians out there, the rules of grammar have changed with common use. Today, in 2019, it is acceptable to use plural pronouns. I know, don't even get me started, plural pronouns as singular pronouns for individuals. You may also hear someone say, you know, I don't use pronouns. I just use my name, so just use my name. This is what agender individuals. Agender describes individuals whose gender identities are neither male nor female. So they don't identify with either male or female. So just their name works, okay? Where can you use your pronouns to show that you understand the importance of them? Think about how much we communicate via email today. This is a great way to create an educational moment. Just slide your pronouns in your email signature, okay? In your,
Hi, welcome. It's very nice to meet you. I'm a huge fan of...
in your introductions, like we just practiced. And if you wear name tags, I see name tags here today. Indicate pronouns on your name tags as well, okay? All right, I've dropped a lot on you, breathe. Okay, I can keep going, but I don't want to. I want to kind of open it up for some questions, just to make sure that I've given you an opportunity to engage with me. Any questions? Yes.
Kids. How do y'all help kids who aren't aware of how they can express themselves?
How do we help kids? Well, here's the thing. There's a lot of trans people, especially trans youth and children, who are not supported in their transition. Consequently, that's why the suicide rate for trans people is over 40%, okay? So how you help trans kids is you listen, all right? You pay attention to things that you see. You pay attention to things that they're telling you. And there, fortunately, in the city of Atlanta, there are some very competent therapists that are trans competent that they can go see. And it's not just the child, it's the family. This is a journey for the family, not just the transitioning individual. So there's a number of things that you can do, but those are just a couple of things. Yes. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes. I'm going to stand close to you because that just throws me.
Sure, I'll try to be loud.
Yes.
As an educator, one of the biggest things to do is to have a supportive educational environment that the students can attend and be a part of. So having role models when able, being able to use correct pronouns when speaking with the student,
Yes.
Being able to talk with the family even.
Right.
I think all of those things are important.
Great, and thank you for doing what is yours to do. We need people like you in those spaces. Anybody else? Are we on time? Yes, question.
How do you see the evangelical community evolving?
Slowly. Okay, and the good thing about that question is because next week, I think we're going to speak to some of that because my business partner, okay, I just can't get this to work. My business partner has written a book on the Bible and the transgender experience, how Scripture supports gender diverse individuals. She will have books here next week. She will sign books if you're interested in learning more about that. She's an ordained Methodist minister, so she's done a lot of work in this space. I can tell you that it depends on the individual, and it also depends on the community about how open and receptive they are. There are a number of spiritual communities that are now having courageous conversations like you all are today and saying, you know, what does this look like for us? And we're encouraging them to do that. Because at the end of the day, I mean, do y'all think we have more in common than not? us as individuals, as human. This is just another expression of the human experience, right? So it's about normalizing our existence as human beings. Good question. But we're going to talk more about that next week. So I'm inviting you to next week. Yes.
Hey, Gabriel, thank you. Can you walk me through the word queer, the genesis of that word?
Yes. So queer, I know that many of you probably know that it's considered by many to be a pejorative term, right? People do not use that term for me because it just doesn't work. But young individuals are reclaiming that word today as a word that describes who they know themselves to be. And queer is used for individuals whose gender identities are fluid, okay? They're not male or female. They may be a combination of both, you know? So it's a term that young individuals use for themselves to identify their gender identity. And also, think about it. If a non-binary individual has a sexual orientation, then how do you define their sexual orientation? Because remember, we said sexual orientation is defined by the perspective of our gender identity. So if you don't identify as male or female, then what do you say your sexual orientation is, right? So queer is used for those individuals to describe that outside of the box, if you will. Now, when it comes to the use of the word queer, even though some are accepting that and reclaiming that, we encourage you not to use that for an individual unless they first use it themselves. Once they use it for themselves, then you have permission to use it when talking with them. We're time. Thank you so much for having me today. We'll be back next Sunday. I hope to see all of you again. Okay?